Good evening.
Hey, Todd.
Todd, I think everybody is here that needs to be here.
Okay, are we expecting Mike, Mike Mitchell and Eric
Eric is here. Let's see.
and Nick?
Nick is here. Oh, Mike's here. Yep. Oh, Mike is here, but she's gonna stay in the attendees.
Okay, well then let's go ahead and get started. I would like to call the August 23rd, 2021 meeting of the Medfield State Hospital Development Committee to order at 7:01 p.m. We are no longer required to begin these meetings by reading Governor Baker's office's statement regarding the open meeting law. Instead, we'll start by confirming committee attendance by roll call. I would note we are down a few members tonight as we've had one committee member relocate out of Medfield and two others who have recused themselves due to their association with CAM. So just to do a quick roll call, Johnny?
Here.
Chris?
Here.
Gus?
Here.
Okay, Todd Trebanco, I'm obviously here. And how about Nick Milano, our ex officio committee member?
Here.
Okay, very good. We're also joined here obviously by Sarah Raposa, our town planner, Mike Mitchell of Mass Development. Sounds like she is on the line. Mass Development is providing technical assistance and financial support for this committee's efforts. And we also have Eric Bush and Erica Schechter of Peregrine Group, who have been retained through the Mass Development Technical Assistance Fund. So first off, I'd like to welcome everybody tonight for the first of our developer presentations and interviews this week. Although we remain at a preliminary stage, we're looking forward to learning more from those who've made proposals and digging further into some details. Our guests tonight are from Trinity Financial. Before I turn it over to the folks from Trinity, I'd like to go over just a few housekeeping items. The meetings this week are limited to 90 minutes. So we do have a lot to cover in that time, and I would appreciate everyone's efforts and cooperation to try to stay on schedule. The format, which you see on the screen, is roughly 20 minutes for the developer presentation, 35 minutes for committee questions, which will incorporate some pre-submitted questions from town department heads and members of the public, and 30 minutes total from our outside reviewers associated with the Medfield Historical Commission, Medfield Historic District Commission, Cultural Alliance of Medfield, and the Medfield Energy Committee. So we will not be taking any questions from the public tonight that were not submitted in advance through the town's website. To the extent we do receive comments or questions via the chat, we'll take those under advisement and follow up with the developer after the interview, along with those other questions that we are not able to get to tonight, just due to time constraints. One last note before turning it over, Eric Bush of Peregrine will be our timekeeper to keep us on track. And he, as you may know, Eric seems very nice on the surface, but he might cut you off if you go past time and ignore his hints that it's time for you to wrap up. So Eric, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I think you covered it all, Todd. Yeah, I will chime in as needed as time starts to approach the designations here, and hopefully we can keep on track.
Okay, and I am not 100% sure, but I believe we have Jim Keefe and Abby Goldenfarb from Trinity and perhaps some others. I think we could just turn it over to them to introduce their team and take us through their proposal.
Todd, if I can just interrupt for 1 second. They have a big team. I think I've promoted everybody that they wanted promoted. If not, feel free to use your raise hand feature. But I've also made Abby a co-host. So if she sees anybody that I haven't promoted that needs to be promoted, feel free to do that, Abby.
Okay, thank you.
All right, it looks like Mark Klopfer had his hand up.
Yep, I just
Okay,
promoted them.
okay.
Thank you.
And I just want to make sure folks can see my screen now.
Yes.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Sarah, are you all ready for us to begin our presentation?
Go ahead.
Wonderful. Jim, I'll pass it to you.
Okay, good evening, everybody. It's very nice to be here. We thought we put these presentations behind us, but it looks like they're going to be with us for a while. I'm not going to take too much time at front other than thanking you for giving us this opportunity and also sharing with you our tremendous respect for the amount of work this committee has put in to try to really maximize the beauty and benefit of this very unique location. I think it's pretty clear by our proposal that we worked very hard to get to both the letter and the spirit of what the planning process was all about. I think it's many layered. As we got into it, we had to dig deeper and deeper, but we really worked hard to try to respect where the process was on this property. I think we have 5 distinctive features of this property that we'd like you to keep in mind. And one of them is, of course, the historic rehabilitation of what is a very important historic asset, not only to Medfield, but to the surrounding area and the Commonwealth. These are incredibly beautiful buildings and they're very unique, and we very much appreciate the desire to restore them. The other important part of this is it's going to generate a lot of housing, which again was something that the proposal spoke to, and we tried to match where the planning process was in terms of the number of units created. We believe that the way it's structured, it will be a net financial benefit to the town, which is obviously very important. Another aspect of this, and again, I'm not telling you folks anything new, but this is just an incredible location. It's absolutely beautiful, very pastoral, amazing views of the Charles. We really want to preserve that. We want people to feel welcome here, that they can walk their dogs, go for walks, and not feel like it's private and enclosed. And we work very hard to do that. I think we have a very experienced team here that has a lot of experience in multi-phase historic campuses, working collaboratively with artist groups. In this particular case, we've done a lot of work in the area of historic restoration and securing a number of awards along those lines. So we think we bring a lot of to that. I'm going to leave it to Abby to introduce the team. But, last but not least, we think the pro forma represents the reality of the current construction market. We're currently pricing historic rehabs now. We think we have a grasp of what the realities are in order to do this properly and correctly. So I think we bring a lot of real-time experience to what the challenges are. Again, we're thrilled that we've been given an opportunity to make this presentation. This is going to be a very complicated project that's going to require a lot of talent and a lot of perseverance, but we are prepared to make that commitment and see the town through all the work that it's done and in terms of making their planning process a reality. And with that, I'm going to quickly introduce Abby Goldenfarb, who's our Vice President for Development at Trinity. And Aaron Horn is also anchoring this as well. He's an Assistant Project Manager. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Abby.
Thank you. So thank you everyone for having us. In the interest of time, we're going to speed through a couple of the slides, and I will introduce people as we've assigned them to speak. We have about 30 team members on the phone or on the call, so to take time to introduce them could take up most of our time. We'd like to talk to you about our experienced development team. Trinity Financial is Boston-based real estate developer. We've been around for 33 years. We have offices in Boston and New York. We've done over $3 billion worth of development, and this is primarily residential development. We've developed over 9,500 units of housing, and we also have a management arm which manages around 7,600 units of housing. We like complicated projects. The more complicated, the better sometime. We have experience marrying historic and new markets tax credits, as well as historic federal and state historic with low-income housing tax credits, and utilizing a lot of the funds that other developers aren't familiar with, such as infrastructure grant funds, such as MassWorks. We've assembled a development team of very dedicated team members who we've worked with for a number of years. Primarily on the call today, you'll hear from Icon Architecture, Nancy Ludwig, who's the president, Maureen Kavanaugh from Public Archaeology Laboratory. You'll also hear from our environmental consultants from New Ecology, and as well as a number of other consultants if we have specific questions to respond to. A couple of the projects we wanted to share with you we think are relevant. The first is Boston East, which is located on the East Boston waterfront. It involved 200 apartment homes, and we also have 26 affordable homes as part of this. We anticipate similar financing to what we're proposing at Medfield. We also have 6 affordable live work artist homes, and we can talk further about that. Another
me,
is
Abby,
Yes.
you're not advancing your screen on my Zoom. Is everybody else seeing Abby's screen advance?
no.
Yeah. You haven't been going through the slides.
We're seeing the cover sheet only, that's correct.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not good. Can you see it now?
There, yes, now you are. Okay.
Thanks, Nancy. So this was Boston East, and Nancy brought that up because she designed this beautiful building. The second one is Appleton Mills, which Nancy also designed. The team from Icon Architecture. Appleton Mills was a building where you walked into and you could reach your hand up and feel the ceiling because it had collapsed onto the floor. Appleton Mills was an extremely complicated historic rehab in downtown Lowell. We turned this into 130 apartment homes with a preference for artists. Finally, we look at Matapan Heights. This is in Matapan neighborhood of Boston. This is most like Medfield State Hospital campus, an expansive campus, complicated historic rehab. We took this on in 5 phases using federal and state historic tax credits. And today it operates as an apartment community with 332 apartment homes. A beautiful campus, lots of open space, and very comparable to how we see Medfield going. The strength of our proposal from our perspective really is the restoration of the historic buildings. We've fallen in love with the buildings from the first time we went out there. They are majestic. You feel like you are in another world on a college campus. They're pretty amazing. And we felt that we just needed to preserve them. What we have done in our proposal is create a plan to create 334 apartments. This would be a mix of market rate and affordable apartments available to individuals and families, and really provide the type of housing that we understood from your public master plan was really needed in Medfield. Something to attract seniors who are moving out of their larger single family homes, to attract young couples and small families. And this was really our goal, to meet that need that you felt was important in the town. We've also wanted to put forth a collaboration with the Cultural Alliance of Medfield for artist programming, so we can speak to that as well. And we'd like the campus to remain accessible and programmable for public enjoyment. We've heard this is really part of the spirit of Medfield. People took great advantage of this during the pandemic and walked their dogs there and really found a place of respite and enjoyment. And that was what we wanted to focus on. I'm going to turn it over to Nancy to walk through the plan that we put forward.
Thank you, Abby. So you see our plan, which Abby has described as being inspired by the existing buildings and this magnificent open space. We don't see having to move around a lot or change much, but we do see an emphasis on Cottage Street as the new entry to the site, bringing one up the hillside, oriented towards what we see as the new heart of the campus, surrounding the new Cultural Arts Center and our amenity space and our artist preference housing. We will be working with the existing street network. We've reserved the outer loop as a two-way loop, and that allows cars to access the site, traverse around, and access small parking lots that have been tailored to meet the parking needs of each of the individual buildings. The inner loop we've imagined as a couple of one-way segments. We don't want a lot of traffic within the inner loop. We really see that roadway network as engaged with the open space and focused on this center of campus. We'll be adapting the buildings. We don't envision a lot of additions. It is our intent to work with the character defining features of these historic buildings and just enhance them. Next. The landscape will also be reinvigorated. You may know there are some older growth trees that may need to be culled to make way for some of these open spaces and view corridors that we imagine. We'll do our best to preserve all the old growth tree that is here. We are imagining at the Cultural Arts Center a artistically paved courtyard, a space that can accommodate cars slowly moving through, but really is meant more for people spilling out of the buildings and encouraging sort of outdoor gathering areas. The space that will be created where building 27B has been demolished, we imagine to be an open space, landscaped around the edges, but really retained as a passive space so that people can, residents as well as neighbors to the site, can come and enjoy the open area, maybe play some games, throw a frisbee, or have a painting class. Again, we will take advantage of the views looking out over the hillside as it drops and create this heart of the campus at its center. Next. We've imagined an atmosphere for the campus that really takes the best of the historic character and imbues it with a healthy dialogue about contemporary living. So places to gather that really build upon the history and tell a story of change. On the exterior, we would envision very little change. Of course, we want to restore the porches and the entries. And on the interior, we'll try to reveal as much of that historic detail as we can, given that we want to create a sustainable building envelope that will help us create a very sustainable living environment here. Next. We've created a few imaginative conceptual views. Here I'm looking into that courtyard, the paved courtyard that I described earlier, where we see the activity and life from the Cultural Arts Center and the amenity building for the residential development coming together. We see it as a place where people can expand into the outdoors, and we'd love to have it surrounded by sculptural elements and artistic elements that really pick up on the sense of energy that we think the Cultural Arts Center will bring to the campus and the new mix of uses. Next. And I also think it's important that this is a view looking at that inner street court. You're looking out over the open space. We intend to improve the sidewalks. We intend to engage clear bicycle areas, enhance the landscape, and make a place for people to enjoy this outdoor, this wonderful outdoor campus.
So now I will turn it over to Maureen Kavanaugh from Public Archaeology Laboratory. I've heard she's on.
I am.
Oh, wonderful, Maureen. I can't see you.
Excuse
Thanks,
me,
Abby.
Maureen. Just if I can jump in for one second, we have about 5 minutes left on the allotted time.
Okay, well, I'll just be very brief. I'm just here to reinforce that Trinity and Icon and PAL have extensive experience with historic tax credits on very complicated projects. And we're familiar with all the requirements in the MOA, and we're confident that this project will meet them and meet the Secretary's standards and the Historic District Commission guidelines. And I'll turn it back to Abby.
Great, thank you. We do have Tom on from NEI to talk about sustainability. We can circle back to that when we get to those questions in particular, but we've kept sustainability in mind as we are identifying opportunities for renewable energy, seeking Energy Star certifications. Sustainability is very important to the Trinity team. We're building one of the first passive house high rises in New York City right now. So this is near and dear to our hearts, but given the time limit, we can come back to this. Our timeline for project implementation is assuming a developer designation in November and a special town meeting vote in April. We would work to have all of the permitting in place by June of 2023. The hope then is to really get into construction documents and commence construction by December 2023. And we'd anticipate construction completion in December 2025. As we have outlined in the proposal, our proposed acquisition price is $3.75 million. We would assume the ongoing landscaping cost and property maintenance that is going on currently that the town is paying for. Again, we anticipate this as being a net positive for the town with the creation of 334 units of housing and just the ongoing public access to this historic gem of Medfield. We again have talked about an artist collaboration with the Cultural Alliance of Medfield. We've proposed a $1 million payment towards their art center construction. We really feel like that is a wonderful initiative that we could support. We'd also propose $250,000 payment towards their programming. We'd like to work with them on a number of initiatives for the campus to create a public call for artists, which we've done in many of our developments, and really create opportunities for artists, and we can get into those in more detail later on. Finally, we think there are incredible opportunities for tax benefits for the town of Medfield. We have done a comprehensive fiscal analysis through a third-party consultant that we've worked with many times. That's in Appendix A of our proposal, which details our assumptions for the property value, the expected new tax revenues, expected additional incremental expenses that would come as a result of this project, and then an annual new tax benefits to the town of at least $716,000 a year. And finally, I will turn it over to Jim just to do the wrap up. Jim.
You're on mute. You're on mute, Jim.
You're on mute.
Thank you. I just was bragging about how I'd mastered this process. Thank you all for having us. We know that this is a very, very difficult decision, a very important decision for the town to make. Again, I just want to say that we spent quite a bit of time trying to respond to both the letter and the spirit of what the town is trying to accomplish here. It's very, very important to have all the pieces put together in order for this to be successful. And some of these pieces may be new to some of you, but we're quite familiar with them. It requires a lot of patience, it requires a lot of perseverance, but we're very confident that working with the town and approaching elected officials, that we'll be able to raise the resources in order to get this done in a way that meets everybody's dreams about what this place could be. So with that, we're going to turn it over to questions.
Exactly at 20 minutes. That's impressive.
Let's see if we can do so well when it's our turn. Thank you very much. Thank you for submitting the proposal and thank you for the presentation. We're going to try to do kind of a round robin here among the committee and keep it to 6 or 7 minutes each. I'm going to go ahead and start with my own questions, if that's okay. And then I have some public questions I want to ask after we hear from other committee members. I think the good news is I only have 2 questions, but the bad news is they're multi-part questions. So Eric, you will have to make sure we stay on track. So my first question was really around the total compensation. I thought there were a couple of different kind of formulas and calculations in the proposal itself. Abby, I noted that you just indicated 3.75 million. Could you just take us through that quickly?
Sure, and yes, we did follow up and try to figure out kind of if there was confusion and where it was. We are proposing a $2 million upfront payment to the town of Medfield. So that's 2 million, a $1 million payment to the Cultural Alliance of Medfield. We're also proposing a $250,000 payment towards artist programming. So that gets you to 3.25 million. And then another $500,000 payment that we'd call it a force account, which would help pay for third-party costs for the town of Medfield. We then calculated on average annually, once the project is stabilized, payments of annual tax payments of approximately $715,000, which gets you to the 4.25 that we had in the proposal.
Okay.
Just for clarity, that's a net payment to the town, annual payment to the town, and the other payments are upfront.
Right. So a couple of questions related to both parts of that. So the acquisition price that's paid up front, which you had said was 2 million. How and when is that paid? There was one reference in tab B to 2 closings, but I wasn't quite sure. If you could just kind of take us through
Sure.
the $2 million that's paid to the town, like when.
That would be paid at the financial closing of the project.
So one payment up front.
Right.
Is that accurate?
No, and again, this is just the beginning of our proposal. We're flexible on this. I know that there were a couple proposed changes or payment schedules that we could talk to you about.
Yeah. No, and that's a good point. I probably should have said before I asked. I mean, these questions are really in the interest of understanding your thinking better, and not criticisms or we have to have a certain answer tonight. Just trying to explore. Okay, and then so your calculation of the $716,000 net annually in tax revenue to the town is in fact annual. So one of the ways that I'm trying to look at this is, I'm a taxpayer in town. What, if the town were to approve this proposal, what does it cost, me as a taxpayer? What is the town on the hook to pay? How does that fit into your calculations, either annually or development costs?
Right.
Abby, you want me to help out with
Sure.
this?
Go for it.
So what you have in there is a schedule that shows gross revenues, which is essentially property taxes and vehicle excise taxes for total revenue of $1.2 million. From that, we subtract the marginal increase in cost to the town for educating X number of additional students, police runs to provide security, fire. This is all through standard processes to determine what the incremental increase in expenses are. And the total expenses that we're projecting here are $485,000. So against the 1.2 in additional tax revenue, we're assuming 485,000 expenses for a annual net contribution to the town of 716,000.
And Todd, just so you know, I know that the proposal was rather dense, but Appendix A is the report that we had commissioned and walks through how those costs were generated.
Right. And so so the way I read the proposal was you are attempting to not only fund all of the development costs, including infrastructure, through the redevelopment transaction, you're also anticipating that beyond the acquisition payment to the town, the proposal will generate $715,000, let's call it, annually in net tax revenue to the town.
Yes.
Okay.
And then that's spelled out pretty clearly in Mark Fougier's fiscal impact study. And there are, all the assumptions in terms of number of school children, police and fire expenses are spelled out.
Okay. And then sort of my last, related question, it, relates to the upfront CAM donation, which I appreciate what you just said about supporting the Arts Center. I know there's some interest in town to understand whether some or all that donation could be reprogrammed to the town. It's the town that paid the price to the state for the property.
We are open to reallocating those funds in any way the town sees as appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Eric, I have another set of questions here, but I think I might be close to my time, and I'd probably like to hand it over to maybe Johnny Martinez at this point.
Hi, I think you answered one or two of my questions in your presentation. So let me see. I think there was one other that I had a question. Okay, the infrastructure is, you guys are proposing that you're taking care of connecting everything, the on-site infrastructure and everything. Where does that end? Does that end at the property line? Do you guys, if there's any additional costs needed in the town to service a property of this size or anything else, are you guys taking on some of that cost also, or are you just stopping at the property? Or what, in your estimates, what do you think might be the greater impact, and are you allowing for all of that?
Jim,
Abby, you want me to take that?
Sure.
We assumed at the property line, as you can well imagine, Mr. Martinez, that the infrastructure costs here are going to be pretty substantial. It's going to be a big number, but we can certainly talk about that. What good is having a state-of-the-art water and sewer system on site if it doesn't connect to anything in town? So I think we'd have to look hard at what your existing capacity is in terms of utilities at the site. And we would obviously have to take that in our scope in order to make the whole thing work.
Okay. And then I assume you guys mentioned, willingness to partner with all the organizations in town, the committees, environmental impacts and all that kind of stuff. What additional, you listed a couple, but what additional soft funds do you guys see having to tap potentially in order to pencil it out? I mean, if this, tends to, these projects tend to get fatter and fatter as they go, I assume you guys have some more creative ways of financing, any funding gaps or anything like that.
Yes, I think we're as Erica Kruder, I think knows, we have really found a niche working with the MassWorks infrastructure funds. We've used that in development projects in Lowell and in Brockton. But we have used creatively, often very creatively, new markets tax credits, low-income housing tax credits, a number of soft grants from DHCD in order to make projects such as this work. So this is really something I think Jim goes to bed every night and wakes up and has a new idea about what other crazy source of funds we could get in to really bring the project to its fullest potential. But this was our starting point with the MassWorks.
And I think I read in the proposal, just I guess more question related more to marketing, a large number of one-bedroom units, which I think is a nice idea in having a way to not impact the schools too, significantly. Is that something that you guys have done the market research? I'm sure you have at this point, but like what extensive research have you done to make sure that model works with that number of not single units, but one-bedroom units?
Jim, I'll turn that to you.
Sure. We're looking at another major project within 495. So it's essentially the same market, but if you look and see what housing is being built today, and you can't go anywhere in the state without seeing new housing being built, most of it's skewed in this direction for a couple of reasons. One is that people are delaying marriage, and two is people aren't having kids the way they did, years ago, where you would lean very heavily on 2 and 3 bedroom apartments. Housing is so expensive now that you have a lot of kids, I shouldn't say kids, but young people living at home with their parents because they can't afford a place of their own. They're not looking for the Taj Mahal. They're looking to get out of the house, and the parents are all too willing to get them out of the house. So providing studios in one bedrooms, they're going to be very nice units with wonderful appliances and fixtures. There's going to be amenities in the building. There's going to be gyms and community rooms and those kinds of things. But the idea is to make it accessible to younger people today, who can't afford $3,500, $4,000 a month for rent. So we're mindful of that. We're also mindful of the fact that people are postponing getting married in smaller family sizes. So we think this niche is going to fit quite well. And again, we didn't invent this. If you look at what's happening around metropolitan Boston, this is what's going on.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, that's what I've got, Todd.
Okay. Thank you. Let's go over to Chris McMahon.
Good evening. A few questions. So no additional new construction in here. Are we leaving value on the table for additional density that we're not taking advantage of?
Abby, you want me to jump on that too?
Sure.
We, again, trying to be respectful of where the planning process resulted in the number of units.
Mm-hmm.
So there is plenty of room in the existing structures to meet that requirement. In fact, there are a lot of places in our plan that are not going to be encountered in order to get this program to work. So you could be leaving value on the table in terms of taking advantage of those spaces. God knows there's a ton of open space to do that as well. But again, we wanted to be respectful of the town's planning process that spelled out pretty clearly the scale in terms of the number of units that want to create it here.
Excellent. And then as it regards due diligence and then to completed construction, I guess to a little bit following on what Johnny said, this is, in my world, this is basically 22 right now, and we're talking about complete construction by 25, I think you said. Once we get in there, and even from an infrastructure standpoint, and then from existing conditions, give us an idea of how that due diligence could expand. The reason I'm going down this road is the world we live in right now is an interesting one where the economy can change in a heartbeat. So I just, as we think about a sellout, it sounds like in 26 at this point. And then let's say we get in there, we're doing our due diligence, we might find some environmental conditions, we might find some of these buildings are not in the condition we expected. Now we're looking at 27. Just for some of the, for those who don't do this every day, as far as your timelines go and understand the way the world works, can you talk a little bit about how your timeframes were put together, and if things have to change, how will that affect the town?
Abby, you want me to take that one too? I'm doing all the talking here. I apologize.
I see a pattern.
Chris, that's the real estate business, right? Who knows what's going to happen in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years?
Mm-hmm.
That's a big risk in our business, right? I think that the way we looked at it is from a number of levels. We have a housing crisis in the Commonwealth. I don't think we're as vulnerable as other areas might be to oversupply. We're cautiously optimistic there'll be a pretty vibrant market at the end of this. I think that we've budgeted 24 months for construction. And we think that that's, given the size, the fact that these buildings exist, the fact they're in pretty good shape, that's a pretty reasonable amount of time to incorporate that. I think the infrastructure component would begin concurrently with the residential component, with the idea being when the infrastructure is complete, we'd be able to connect the completed buildings at about the same time. That's always optimal. So I think, we've made some reasonable assumptions that we're prepared to live with, but all the while knowing that, who knows what the crystal ball tells us in terms of what's really going to happen. But, and I fear making, clear and explicit statements around this because, I don't want to jinx anything. But I think what we've got here for timing is very reasonable. We're comfortable with it.
Thank you.
Okay. Chris, unless you have further questions, we'll turn it over to Gus.
I'll yield to Gus.
Thanks, Todd. You guys all yielded so much faster. I don't know that I have that many questions, but I usually do. First, just a general comment. I appreciate the point you made about trying to understand what the town is looking for and trying to be responsive to that. If for what it's worth, as one voice in the crowd, that was one of the things that jumped out at me, that I did come away, given that you're coming in and learning about a complex piece of property and then hearing probably a pretty complex concept in our master plan. My impression is that you got what we were trying to do. So I appreciate that. My questions are probably going to be all over the map here. I'm the guy that's not the real estate developer, so I just have a random mind. One of the big, not a big question that I have, but one of the questions that occurred to me as I read the proposal, I don't want to trivialize what you're doing here, but at the end of the proposal, I said, oh, they're doing a really nice job of doing a historic rehabilitation of these buildings, and it will be a rental complex. And I don't mean that in any derogatory way whatsoever, but in terms of the business model of what this will become from the standpoint of the economics of how it operates and everything, if this is all rental units that you're going to have, then in my desire to simplify how I look at it, I'm saying, well, this is going to be a very large rental complex. And if first off, if that statement, it's not intended at all to trivialize this at all. But if that's a fairly accurate statement of how you're envisioning this community operating for some period of time, my question is around the business model that you have for operating the property. And where I've learned more about some of this stuff as I've been involved with this property. I know that when you have, say, affordable housing, there's a certain amount of time the affordable housing needs to be rental property. If that's the concept, it has to remain that way. It sounds like you have an intention of operating, of having this property managed as rental property once it's up and completed and occupied. My question was, what is your business model in terms of whether that's a 50-year plan, a 20-year plan, a plan until we can sell them off when they're no longer, we don't have to keep them as rentals? Just try to understand that.
Abby, you want me to jump on that as well?
Go for it, Jim.
You can see I'm not I'm a CEO that was pretty involved with this one. That they said, never fall in love with your own projects. Well, I guess you could accuse me of falling in love with this one. So I have really looked at many aspects of this. So in terms of the rental component, a big capital source here is going to be the sale of federal and state historic tax credits, which by definition have to be rental projects. They can, they are really the game changer here in terms of making this feasible. Insofar as the rental property is concerned, remember 25% of these units are going to be income and deed restricted. That doesn't necessarily mean that over time that these can't be converted to homeownership units. That's not going to be within 7 years, because in order to qualify for the credits, you have to occupy them by the same entity and own them and control them by the same entity for that period of time. After 7 years, many of those restrictions go away. The deed restrictions on the affordable units won't go away, but perhaps there's an opportunity to give those renters an opportunity to buy their units. I believe it's been done before. It adds a certain level of complexity, but we're perfectly happy managing this, because when we're done with it, it's going to be beautiful. People are going to want to live here. They're going to want to be part of this. So we're, we see it being very feasible either way, but it doesn't preclude at some point, Gus, some kind of, individual forced sales. That's been done before, and it can be done here. It really is what the market says can happen. Does that answer your question?
That does, yeah, thanks. Another question that I have, again, going off in a different direction. We briefly touched on the idea of you pursuing MassWorks and other types of grant programs. At this early stage in the process, can you describe the nature of the collaborative relationship you would hope to have with the town in pursuing those grants? I don't have a good feel for whether you all know what the grants are, you know how to do it, and if we stay out of your way, that would be great, or whether the town needs to be, fairly involved in order to lend its support and enthusiastic endorsement, or whether we actually even have to do half the rowing on this.
I can answer that. The town really is a partner in this, and as Erica Schechter from Peregrine Group knows, who she was with EOH, the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development, when we were actually working on both of the projects we've used it on. The town is a partner. The town does complete the application with Trinity, providing a lot of the kind of backup information, but the town does go hand in hand with the developer in this. So all of our developments, whether we apply for MassWorks funding or other type of funding sources, we do not do anything without talking with the town. We make sure you're involved and invited to all of the phone calls and meetings. This really is a collaborative effort.
Okay. And now go off in a third weird direction here, if we could. Early in your proposal, you brought up the issue of the gun range. And there's one place in your proposal that basically, as I read it at least, basically said, listen, this is a showstopper if you guys can't figure out how to handle it. And I think I understand why you'd feel that way. And I don't think it's unreasonable to expect us to tackle that issue. Although there's some open questions, I think, in my mind around who actually controls that gun range and what that might actually entail. Could you just elaborate a little more on, if at this early stage, again, kind of the type of a resolution that you would be looking to the town to get to take that off as a disqualifying consideration for your proposal?
I think I actually don't think we know exactly what the resolution is at this point. The intent of our bringing that to your attention, engaging a Centec, really was to say this is an issue. We know it's an issue. If it's not an issue for another development team, at one point it will be an issue. And we want to approach it together with you to figure out what the options are. Can it be relocated? I mean, I don't think we're entering this with, one specific vision.
I think it's important to understand, and this is I see this as a real problem, and if other proposals have not raised this as an issue, then I think they will. I think they'll have to. It's one thing about the decibel level, but it's also the percussion that comes from automatic rifles firing periodically during the course of the day. I walked the site. I found it very disturbing. I can't imagine prospective people that want to live here are going to be able to, I mean, particularly in this day and age, are going to have a real problem with that. I also think we want to keep this accessible to the public. We want it to be a place where people feel welcome. They can walk their dogs. They can enjoy the open space. And that experience, I believe, is significantly compromised by the gunfire. So I think it's not an our problem, it's a we problem. And as Abby said, how we go about solving that is something we collectively need to work on. It will significantly underscore the value of the place. And I think the opposite will deteriorate, but also will improve the quality of the open space in general.
We have a gun range at the other end of town that was there before the houses were there, and so I'm sensitive to some of the issues, some of the aggravation it causes to people who live there. So I get that. I would make the observation that so far it doesn't appear that, from the standpoint of enjoying the open space, the proximity of the gun range has done much to clip off the demand that people have and the interest in walking dogs. But that's separate from people having to live there. I'm another quarter to a half mile farther away, and so I know when the gun range is operating, but it's not, I'm sensitive to how often it is.
It's like kind of like the people living in East Boston. They don't hear the planes flying over their head.
Right. So Eric, I have two micro questions, and if you want to cut me off on time, you can, but if not, let me ask them. Johnny kind of brought up the issue around infrastructure, and what I'm trying to get straight in my head is, again, at this early stage of the process, whether we have a clear boundary over where the infrastructure responsibilities would rest with you all versus the town. And I can't exactly tell from the wording of your proposal where you're working from. So I'll start with a point that says, in my head, I basically said, you're going to buy the property, the infrastructure responsibility on your side of that boundary line is your responsibility, and the feeder infrastructure that gets everything to the property is the town. So that's where I'm starting from, and I want to make sure that that's correct. There's one thing that you brought up at some point in the process about wanting the town to take on the responsibility for snow plowing. And when a developer comes in and develops a neighborhood, typically the developer owns the responsibility for the roads in that neighborhood and the infrastructure to feed the units in that neighborhood. Once things are completed, oftentimes a developer or even the neighborhood itself will petition the town to take responsibilities for the road. And if the road is built in accordance with the standards that the town has for a town road, that's an entirely feasible thing to have happen. So when I read what you were looking for, my first thought was, well, if the outer ring road is built to a town standard, then I can see how we could get there where the town could take responsibility. My reading of the inner ring road and what you had planned for it seemed like it was a more aesthetic construction.
Yeah.
That probably wouldn't be part of that. And I just wanted to make sure that was.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
That sounds reasonable. That sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the last one is a super micro. Somewhere in the early part of the proposal, there's one paragraph that mentions that this is 2 projects. However, I'm also sensitive to the fact that it's a single phase construction, 2-year construction period. I never saw another reference to the 2 projects, so I don't know whether that was an artifact, maybe from some other proposal that had been picked up and that one little thing hadn't been picked up on. But is in your mind, as you conceive of this, is this actually a 2 project, or is it a single project with a single construction phase?
To answer your question, we are looking at it as a 1-phase project. At one point, we did look at it as a 2-phase project, but I don't know where you're talking about, but it could have been also referring to the cultural arts campus.
Yeah.
So I just need to clarify that.
Okay.
I think it's in tab B, Abby. I think it's tab B.
There was only one reference and it was 1 paragraph, and I've done enough projects. My curiosity was, gee, I wonder what the 2 projects are. So that's
Nope.
all. Okay. I'm finished.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Eric, we have a few minutes left here before we go to outside reviewers. So I'm going to try to ask a couple of questions that have come up in some of the, submitted in advance by public, and I try to keep it very short. One question, Jim and Abby, just I guess kind of the big question of if the proposal relies on public funding, it's a multi-year project, what do you do if the public funding does not come through from the state? I'm sure something you have lived with in every other project, but kind of what are your thoughts?
There's a lot of projects that we have completed over the years that would not have happened without public funding. But we're pretty confident that, we're going to have to work hard. We're going to have to work very much in concert with you and your elected officials, but we've had a pretty successful track record in raising money for these kinds of projects.
Additionally, I would also add that our lenders and investors would require that all the financing is either assured or reasonably assumed to come into place before we start construction, so that it's not like you start construction, there's a hole in the ground that remains there. So,
Right. Like the Filene's building from a few years ago. Right?
yeah.
Okay, we had a question from the public. The property is used quite extensively now by dog walkers, and if there was a way to accommodate non-resident dog walkers at the property in your mind once it's redeveloped.
We love dogs. So yeah, that was what part of our intention about keeping the roads public, making sure there's public access to certain parts of the campus. As we do at all of our properties that have public components, we obviously will establish, working with the town, a set of guidelines so that the landscaping is maintained and all of those things that make for good public access and open space.
Okay, and then the last question, we get a lot of what if type questions on this committee. So I appreciate what I saw in the response as attempting to, respond to what the RFP said it was looking for in terms of the total number of units and historic renovation, or at least units not to exceed. But the question is really around, impact on feasibility if the project were to be fewer units, or if some buildings were maybe taken by CAM, or, if the town retained the green and the Northfield, some of these open spaces. I mean, could you just talk a little bit about the economics of scale, 334 units versus a project that was more limited?
From our perspective, I think, there are, as Jim mentioned, there are enough buildings on site where it could be a much larger development. But we wanted to respect the town's limits on housing. So we would really work to make these units as efficient as possible. We're open to having a conversation about other options and what if this and that, but this really was our attempt to try and to meet the town's objective in terms of density.
And I think the other part of that is that, the infrastructure cost per unit already are pretty high, right? So if we reduce the number of units, it starts to become more like a big infrastructure project and not a residential project. So there is that leverage issue that we need to be mindful of. If we increase the number of units, then that infrastructure cost is spread over more units, and therefore its cost per unit is absorbed more easily. So again, we took the number you gave us, and to lower that would, things begin to get a little out of whack.
Okay.
We actually for about up until a week before we turned in the proposal had 335 units. And then we realized that seemed like a cruel joke. So.
Well, it was interesting because I saw that you were proposing to restore, certain buildings, including in the Arboretum, but elsewhere as well, that the master plan, saw as probably slated for demolition. So I thought that was an interesting aspect to what you proposed. And, there may be some in town that, maybe you just talk just for a minute about, these open spaces like the Northfield and the Green. Do you see those, Trinity acquiring those and maintaining those in the future as a integral part of what you're proposing? Or is it, kind of a response to the RFP saying the town kind of wants a wholesale solution? Meaning if the town retained the Green and the Northfield as open space and retained ownership of it, does that have any negative impact on your proposal?
I think.
I can just interrupt for 1 second. We're just crossed over, so we're just over 35. But
okay.
Please.
So do you want me to?
Yes, please answer that.
The toughest part for this to get done is these buildings. The balance of the site as they exist today are contributive, given their history and their proximity. But the real challenge is doing these buildings. So, we could certainly discuss how it could be helpful with the town and pursuing some of their more open space aspirations, recreational aspirations. But we thought the mission here was to focus on these historic properties and try to get them all restored.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Eric, I think I had heard some church bells ringing or something, so I think that means my time is up.
Your time is up, so just if I could take back over, I hate being the bad guy, but to keep us on track, we're a couple minutes past. Now would be the time to move on to the outside reviewers. So 10 minutes for Medfield Historical Commission and the Historic District Commission.
I'm promoting Michael Taylor now.
This is Mike Taylor.
Yes.
Sarah?
The connection's not great, Mike, but yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I was afraid I'm on a deserted island. Anyway, so we're going to cede our 10 minutes because essentially you're restoring or saving all the historic contributing buildings, and we really don't have any questions. You've addressed all of our issues. I also spoke with David Temple this morning or this afternoon. He was okay with that.
Great. So from a timing perspective, do we, Todd, I defer to you, of course, move on to the Cultural Alliance of Medfield?
I just promoted Jean and Jerry from the Cultural Alliance of Medfield.
Thanks, Sarah. I think Jean is going to ask the questions because we realize once I open my mouth, that's about 30 minutes. So
Fair
what's the
enough.
laughter? I don't get it.
Thank you. And I just wanted to start with an acknowledgement and recognition, Abby, to you and your team about how sensitive you've been to the extensive public input from the master plan. And I wanted to thank you for the value that you see in the Arts Center by both offering a donation and some expertise in terms of helping us to move forward. And I just really appreciate your stated sort of position and intent to work closely and in collaboration with us and with the town. As a leaseholder, we're really grateful for that position. I'll shift over to my questions. And the first one is about the extensive sort of market research and the regional needs that CAM has completed our evaluations of. And it would require additional space beyond our initial lease to address those. So my question then is, how open are you to the Cultural Alliance expanding its footprint, in particular in the core area?
I think we would welcome those conversations. We definitely have, there's definitely a lot of space available. We see working with you as a key part to the success of the project. Our main, intent is just to make sure that we are working with you to maintain the historic integrity of the tax credits, to not jeopardize any of those. That's obviously a key component to our financing. But
for us as well.
Yes, I'm sure it is. So we're happy to continue to explore ways to work together.
Okay. And in the master plan, excuse me, it moved to a model of shared parking throughout in order to avoid having to pave over additional open space. And I'm wondering how you would think about proposing or how to address some of this additional parking needs, in particular for visitors to the Art Center, for example. And our lease, for example, requires that our parking be shared with the public as well, other residents on the property.
I think we are open to that conversation. I think, a lot of we see opportunities for sharing when folks that are living in our development or at work, there's opportunities for sharing then. I think one of the key needs that our residents will have is parking close to their homes. Mm-hmm. So having those dedicated parking spots are, is very important. So people in the middle of the winter aren't walking across the expansive campus. But we're happy to explore, and our landscape architects, this again, what we propose is the beginning of a conversation. We just will need to be mindful of who will live here and work here at the end of the day.
And visit here, right?
Visit here, yes.
Thank you. I'm also wondering, CAM is a bit of an island in the middle of this proposal. I'm wondering how you're thinking about common elements throughout the property, like in some of your beautiful images with the street lights running down the road. How do you think about that in relation to CAM's lease space?
I think, again, we're open to working with you. I think our initial, I don't remember who it was on our design team, but basically had this looking like the Decortiva Museum with sculptures throughout
I
the
noticed.
entire development. And if there's a way to make that happen, we think that's incredible. So we welcome the arts to this campus and recognize the importance of it to the town.
I guess I was thinking more in terms of like how to have consistency with elements like street lighting or landscaping or
Of course,
those kinds of things.
we love those conversations. So I see Nancy smiling.
You also in your proposal talk about your you sort of touched on a community outreach process that would be coming. I'm wondering if you could talk about in other projects sort of what kinds of changes you might have made in proposals as a result of community input.
So I think the most pertinent example I could use was in the city of Lowell, where we started out working on the master plan there, and really our decision to create 130 units with a preference for artists came as a result of the artists showing up at our meetings, being angry because they felt that development was pushing them out of Lowell. So it really did shape the program of the development. It also, I mean, as another strange example was someone thought of an idea of a road that would connect an intersection in the town through our project, and everyone scratched their head thinking that it was the strangest thought ever. But at the end of the day, after studying it, our traffic engineer said that's actually a really good idea and it will ease the traffic on other parts of the town. So we're open to those conversations. We put forth our initial vision for the project and look forward to other comments that can help shape it into a better project.
And I wouldn't be doing our constituents justice if I didn't ask if you were open to increasing the percent of units for artists' preference.
We'd be open to it. At the end of the day, it's not our decision. That's something that we will need to get the state and to sign off on. Again, if there's demand for it, I think if the town could build the case and the artist can build the case, we think we'll have a shot at it. But it's at the end of the day, it's something we've got to convince the state that we are doing it in the by the letter of the law and that it's not excluding people, and we're open to that.
Okay. Jerry, did you have anything else you'd want to add?
No, I also just wanted to echo and say how much I appreciate the, it's clear when you see over 400 pages, and I wasn't on the committee, but I went to the state hospital, planning, how much effort you did put into, respecting, the 4 years of work that was put in and listening to the town. So, there are a lot of unknowns, but having a good partner who listens is a good starting point. And probably the proposal is the best way to say, did you listen? And at least on reading it, there's a whole lot of listening you guys did. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. I think we're set for now.
Okay. So that leaves us with the Medfield Energy Committee, last but not least. Do we have Jim Nail with us tonight?
All right, 1 second. All right, there is somebody just named Jim that I'm going to promote.
What could go wrong?
Excuse me, Todd, David Temple has raised his hand. I don't know if we want to give him a chance to speak since Mike Taylor spoke for the Historic District Commission. David is the chair of the Historical Commission.
We can give David a minute. Do we have David?
I'm bringing him up now.
Okay, am I on now?
You're
Yes,
on,
you are.
David.
Okay, good, thank you. I had one thought as we were going along, and that is, how will we know when you're doing the historic restoration that the work is being done to the Secretary of the Interior standards, and how that plays into the whole prospect, the whole project, particularly if it's I guess that applies to rental units anyway. There are no credits unless they are rental, but as I understand it.
Sure. So we will have to submit a part 1 to the Department of the Interior, laying out our intent for what we're going to, what the buildings will look like. We'll then submit our part 2, which is kind of very detailed design and construction drawings detailing all of the painstaking processes and the construction materials we'll be using in order to receive our part 3, which the Department of the Interior has to sign off on in order for us to receive our tax credits. So we've done this in every historic project we've undertaken, working with Maureen Kavanaugh, who's on our team. She will come out to site inspections and is in working closely with the Park Service through each step of this process.
That's good. Good. Thank you very much. Yeah, we're very impressed by what we've seen so far.
Thank you.
Okay, well, let's thank you, David. Let's go over to Jim and make sure he gets his full 10 minutes.
Great. Thank you very much, Todd. Thank you, Trinity team. Really appreciate all the work that went into the proposal and certainly appreciate the attention you paid to sustainability, high energy performance standards, et cetera. This spring, the town passed a resolution supporting the state's net zero 2050 goal, and we were writing a climate action plan on how we're going to meet that. Obviously, a development of this size adds to the overall carbon footprint of the town. So the Energy Committee is very focused on how we can minimize that addition here. Certainly appreciate the statement you made about electrifying heating and cooling on the campus. But on page 140, it does say that you anticipate providing a new gas main with associated service connections. What's that gas going to be for? Did you evaluate electric alternatives to that? And if so, why were those not accepted?
So we thank you because you read every detail of our proposal. And that was an error that in miscommunication, we will not be providing gas service. Our intent is to have the entire heating and cooling be electric. So thank you for catching that.
Okay, so it'll be induction ranges, probably hybrid hot water heaters.
I will turn to Nancy Ludwig, who's our architect, and Tom Chase from New Ecology, who really lives and breathes this every day and can speak to where we are in the process at this point in time.
I'll just briefly state, it is our intent to use all electric systems for heating, cooling, and to the best of our abilities, domestic hot water. This is something actually that we are doing on a number of projects, as we're seeing many communities who are very interested in these types of systems. I would say in the 3 years that we've been designing this way, we continue to see innovations and improvements in these systems. Right now, the big problem for residential development is the electric hot water. You know, the heat pump hot water heaters are not so great yet, but in another couple of years, who knows what we can take advantage of. So For the residential uses, it is entirely possible to get there. With that, I think just one more comment. These are historic buildings, and we have to protect those resources. So in terms of the kinds of robust envelopes that we would suggest for a new building, that's going to be tough to do here. We can't wrap these buildings in insulation. We can't even put a whole lot of insulation on the inside of them because that has a detrimental effect on the historic masonry and mortar. So, we'll be studying carefully what our options are there. And even windows, as we pursue historic tax credits, will really need to match the mutton and the width of sash, and that would be tough to do in a triple glazed window. So again, there's a balancing act going on there, but working with Trinity, we've done a number of high performance projects. Abby mentioned Passive House, which has been a goal that we've achieved actually. So we'll be balancing those concerns. Tom, I may have stolen some of your thunder.
I did submit a written question. I hope you'll respond in writing with some more details about how you handle some of those issues in other historic rehab situations.
Sure.
No, and thanks for that question and for those responses. I would just tack on that, there's a lot of design study yet to be done for a very diverse set of buildings. And so when it comes to specific systems, I think you may, very likely see a diversity of alternatives that meet the goals that have been outlined in the proposal and in the Energy Committee's guiding document and the RFP. And I would also say that, one of the balancing acts that we're doing and we're going into eyes wide open with this proposal is understanding the historic limitations and how far we can really ratchet down the energy use of the buildings without impacting the historic assets. Also comes with understanding what kind of renewable assets we can bring from the grid and from the site to offset those. So it wouldn't necessarily look like a conventional net zero project with very little energy and very little generation. We might end up with more generation, but yeah, we very, very much look to understand that.
Okay.
And of course, we treat that generation very artistically.
Mm-hmm. So that leads to my follow-up question. I assume this is air source heat pump, not ground source heat pump. But that's a lot of heat pump units around the campus. And while heat pumps are great, there is a risk of the refrigerant leaking, and that's an issue coming up more and more in the industry. How will these units be maintained? Do you have any practices of monitoring for potential leaks and then rectifying those as quickly as possible to avoid the damage from those refrigerants, which have a very high global warming potential?
That's another great question, and maybe I'll just jump in. We've worked with Icon and Trinity on several heat pump projects at this point, and I think we would seek to employ similar efforts as on those, which is a focus during during design on minimizing the amounts of refrigerants, during construction in terms of commissioning and understanding that we have tight systems that do not leak and perform as expected. And then the other thing that we do on all of our Trinity projects is really coordinated operations training at the end of construction to make sure that the folks who take on responsibility for maintaining the buildings and the systems understand that role. I think that's the picture that we envision with the heat pumps that are generally on the market today. We do also have our eye on far lower global warming potential refrigerant heat pump systems. So if and when those become available and tested and effective in buildings like these, I think, if that's on the shorter time frame, I think we'd be happy to look at those as well to really reduce that risk.
Great. My last question is then the next follow-up to that. These systems typically have an expected useful life of 15, maybe 20 years. So between now and 2050, there will be turnover of those units. What kind of changes do you think might be required in the future changeover to further bring the carbon footprint of the development down and get as close as possible to that net zero goal?
It's a great question. I think the intention that we are putting forward is for a net zero ready development that in the application of its systems would only seek to increase efficiency down the line, as opposed to fundamentally re-envision system types. And so for those those turnovers that we would see in 15 to 20 years before 2050, ideally they would really be the same types of distribution, conceptually the same types of mechanical systems that would then be higher efficiency based on what's on the market, and therefore lower emissions, but not a fundamental reimagining or a significant kind of destructive process of rehab again.
Okay. I think that's about my time, unless I have time to squeeze in one more.
You have 1 minute per the timekeeper.
1 minute. Well, let's go back to improving the energy performance of the old buildings. Are there a couple of techniques and things that you'll particularly be evaluating once you have a chance to really get into the buildings and see, what they're like?
Well, what we've done in obviously we'll be replacing all the windows. We'll be looking at the thermal envelope, which, we believe that we can modestly insulate on the interior. As part of that insulation, we'll be looking at the best material to cut down infiltration, right? Sealing, accommodating, stopping moisture transfer is really the most important issue for that envelope. We have not been in all the buildings, honestly, because we were not allowed to tour them all, but there are some large attics, large basement areas, providing some of which we actually may want to incorporate into the units, up into some of the gabled ends that are windows. But in projects like this, where we've not been able to have a robust thermal envelope, we make sure that we're insulating well at our ceiling or attic level, as well as our lower floor level. And the good news is, once these buildings would start to be divided up into apartment-sized units, that unit, you'd be cutting down on the amount of exterior wall associated with a single unit. So in that regard, each unit is insulating to the next unit, right? To maintain something more comfortable and appropriate. Does that respond to your question?
Yeah, no, it's very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have crossed over the 10-minute. We're a couple minutes behind, Todd.
Okay, no, I think that's very good. And, we're trying to kind of keep a standard time for the interviews that we're doing. So I want to thank everybody on the Trinity team for joining us tonight and telling us more about their proposal and answering our questions. There have been a few questions submitted through the chat feature tonight. We do have some additional questions of our own that we didn't get to, so we will follow up and would ask you to respond in writing to the questions that we forward to you.
I'd just like to say in closing that this is a rescue mission. You have a very stark choice between us and the other proposal. We see it as a rescue mission, and it's going to require a lot of pieces to put the puzzle together. But we're pretty confident with working with your town administrators, your elected officials, the governor's office, all of the partners and parties that have a vested interest in seeing this restored. Working together, we think we'll be able to do this, and it'd be really a stunning accomplishment.
Well, thank you very much. We will be in touch with some additional questions, and just, in terms of our next steps, overall, we'll be collecting, written comments and evaluations from our committee and our outside reviewers, and connecting with our selectmen trying to move this process along. So thank you again for all the
Great,
work you
thank
put
you.
into it and for your time tonight.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Appreciate
you
it.
so much.
Have a good night.
You too.
Take care.
Okay, so that was our agenda. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So we have a motion to adjourn from Johnny. Do we have a second? Is that a second from Gus? Okay, we'll do a roll call vote. Chris McMahon,
Aye.
Todd Trebanco, I'll vote aye. Gus Murby,
Aye.
Johnny Martinez.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes. Our meeting is adjourned. Thank you,
Good
everyone.
job, everyone.
Have a good night, everyone. Good meeting.
See you in a few days.